to the next of our short films on the elements of negotiation. And in this film, we are looking at two of the elements combined, which is the generation of options and the making of commitments. A reminder that these are two of the 7 elements as defined by Patton. And really these two are put together because they underline the fact that negotiation is, if you like, a conversation with a purpose. It has to be going somewhere. And in order to get to the point where there has been a deal agreed, we need to both generate options and bind ourselves by making commitments to one another. And just a reminder again, negotiation is a twin-track process, that it isn't just about the what we're negotiating over, it's also about the how. In other words, it's about the process as well as the substance. And that applies to option generation and the making of commitments. What is it you're pledging to do in terms of how you treat one another? What is it you're suggesting in terms of how you structure the negotiation, the media by which you communicate, and so on and so forth? Okay, so let's think about options then. Well, options, I should say, first of all, need to be understood as a specific term as we describe the elements of negotiation. So elsewhere in these short films, we will meet the word alternative, and we also call that the BATNA, B-A-T-N-A. An alternative in this context means what's the alternative for us if we don't arrive at a negotiated settlement. So that has a very distinct meaning in this context from options. By options we mean the ideas for possible solutions that are generated within the context of the negotiation itself. So just be clear on your terminology when we're talking in the specifics of the elements of negotiation, please. Okay, the classic form of option generation involves trade. So the what ifs. The option in the sale and purchase of a car, for example, is for the exchange of money for goods. And equally that could apply in terms of services and everything else. So the idea of options which involve some form of trade is a fairly classic way of envisaging and characterising the options that could be put on the table as possible solutions to the deal. If you pay me such and such an amount, then I will hand over the ownership or use of the goods or give you the benefit of the services. Options might involve the converging of shared interests, for example. So let's imagine 2 shareholders in a business who are looking at how they might go further. And one of them says, well, why don't we merge our interests? And the other one says, yes, let's do that and enhance the value by taking up a majority shareholding and indeed taking over the business entity in which we have at the moment 2 significant minority interests. So that involves options that reflect the converging of interests of the parties. A third way of thinking about option generation is to think of it as dividing the roles or the tasks, and again this disaggregates the interests of the parties. So let's think about splitting a task, where one person might suggest, why don't I do the Monday to Wednesday, and the other says, okay, in that case I'll do the Thursday to the Friday. Now the options here involve disaggregation of interests here rather than converging or specifically trading as such. What are options? Well, from Patton, options are possible agreements or pieces of a potential agreement on which negotiators might possibly agree. Now, if you look how heavily qualified or hedged this statement is from Patton here, the deal isn't done until the deal is done. And options here are the what ifs and how abouts. They are necessary parts of the creative thinking process that any good deal making should involve. Using shared or different interests are good ways of generating options, as I've described in the brief examples I gave you a moment ago. And crucially there, as a key to all effective negotiation, is you need to look at the possible options through the eyes of your counterpart, through the eyes of the other party. You know what you want and you know why you want it, but do you understand what the other side wants, what might be appealing to them, and the reasons why a given option may or may not be appealing to them? You need to borrow their eyes. And some warnings in terms of creating options. Don't be limited in your thinking. Positional negotiators will always believe that there's only a fixed sum to be divided. So in the shareholding example we just looked at, I must own all the shares or you must own all the shares. Well, maybe it's more creatively if we pool our shares and then we get a majority and then we take over the company together. What's the potential of that new unexplored territory for us both, perhaps? Don't also think that if an option is unacceptable to the other side, then that's their problem rather than yours, or it reflects a weakness in their position rather than yours. You're both involved in deal making together. Deal making is mutual problem solving. So their problem is your problem too. So get involved, get your sleeves rolled up in that problem solving exercise with them. And this is a classic for anyone who's ever done any of this kind of brainstorming, problem solving type exercise, don't evaluate too early. Let people's minds flow freely, let the options get generated, get them out on the table before you start testing them for reality, testing them against practicality and so on. Separate the inventing from the deciding. Some more warnings when it comes to creating options. This is from the science really of consumer behaviour as much as anything else, but too many options can actually cause us to be decision averse. We defer or avoid decisions if we have too much choice. And experiments done by Tversky and Kahneman and various others, which are referred to in the literature, actually support this idea that when people have too many choices, then they either make no choice or they will defer making that choice. So it could actually slow up your deal making process if you generate too many options and don't narrow them down to a select and practical few soon enough. The other issue with option generation is that if you have too many, is that you induce what's called buyer's remorse, so that the one you do choose at the end, you actually then devalue. You think, oh, maybe I should have taken option A when in fact I took option F. Maybe that's actually a function not necessarily of the objective value of those particular options, but of the fact that you had too many in the first place. Now, all of that is about our psychology as human beings, but it's equally applicable in the negotiation room as it is in the general consumer marketplace, if you like. Options are further discussed in Getting to Yes, the textbook that I've recommended to you. You'll see a lot about the generation of options there. It's one of the 4 key principles of the Getting to Yes model. Let's briefly talk about commitments, and there's an example of one being made very publicly there. Commitments can be pledges to build agreement, very positive. I will do this. I pledge to do this. Here is an undertaking I am making. Commitments can also be threat type pledges. If this doesn't happen, then we will walk away. We will go on strike. I will take my business elsewhere. I will go public with this information. These are all threat type commitments or pledges that are very much part of the back and forth dialogue of a negotiation. And quite often, the commonest type of commitment we see in a negotiation, understandably, is the reciprocal or conditional commitment. If I award you 5% more on the contract, will you get the goods to me 3 days earlier, as a for instance? And the if and then, which emphasises and reinforces the reciprocal nature of the commitment and the obligations that we put ourselves under in a negotiation, is very, very common as a form of conditional commitment that we see in negotiation. Commitments can also be all of these things that are along the bottom of your screen just now: public, positional, procedural, substantive, formative and summative. Let me give you some examples. There's yet another Hollywood negotiation movie, Ransom, with Mel Gibson. Involves some very public, very positional taking of a threat type commitment. I'll give you the YouTube links to that, and you can look them up yourselves separately. And this happens an awful lot. It goes on in political negotiations. If you think about Brexit, if you think about geopolitical negotiations, North Korea and the US, as is happening in 2017, for example, commitments are very often taken in a public place in order to induce a change in behaviour or a change in position of the other side that may then be negotiated further and perhaps with a bit less bluff and bluster in the privacy of the negotiation room. Very, very common. The taking of positional commitments can also be seen by ourselves as hagglers in the consumer market. Here's a consumer market in Peru where haggling and taking positions and then whittling down your position and moving towards a compromise settlement price over goods, for example, very, very common, as it is in many cultures across the globe. And I've been there in Peru, in these marketplaces, and the melodramatic taking of positions where we throw our hands up, where we act outraged, where we look as if we're walking away, and then we come back and make a counter offer and so on. All of this is pledging commitment. If you can go this far, I might do that. If you can't go any further, then I'm afraid I'm walking away and I'm going to go to the next stall down to see if I can get a better deal. All of these are formative commitments within the course of a negotiation, as well as being public and positional. Our substantive and summative commitments are the ones that we get to at the end of the deal, and that might be reflected in, for example, a written agreement, for example, a formal treaty, or something like that. Now, that won't happen in a consumer environment, of course, but it may happen in more formal negotiations. It might take place in the employment context, in the commercial high-value stakes context, or somewhere else again in geopolitics or something like that. So these again reflect different forms of commitment.